Some of you probably saw this. This is really embarrassing. So, the Democratic leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, in response to Trump occupying Washington, D.C. with federal forces and threatening to do the same to Chicago and other cities, the Democrats, of course, are vehemently opposed to this, and because they are so opposed to this, they're going to do something about it. And Hakeem Jeffries is going to tell us what he's going to do about it.
I think the D.C. Attorney General issued a strong letter making it clear that, in his view, in the assessment of the authorities in the District of Columbia, whoever Donald Trump seeks to install allegedly to run the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C., has no authority, and that they should continue to take direction solely from the police chief of the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. I thought that was a strongly worded letter. He cited a lot of statutory provisions. I think the Attorney General was exactly right. I think the D.C. Attorney...
It gets me how he repeats strongly worded letter. Like that hits really hard, and everyone's like, oh, strongly worded letter was a meme back in like 2016 to like make fun of useless Democrats. Like all throughout the first Trump admin, it was always like Trump is separating families or, doing some awful shit. And it was like, oh, what are the Democrats gonna do? A strongly worded letter? This dude is out here in 2025 as like the new Democratic leader of the House, and he's unironically talking about strongly worded letters. You don't even have to go to like historical examples to see how silly this is. Like, do you think, what if you wrote Putin a strongly worded letter, Any world leader, pretty much. Do you think a strongly worded letter is gonna do fucking shit? Are you kidding me? What the hell? This is their level of resistance. Again, Hakeem didn't even write the letter. He's just saying he agrees with the strongly worded letter that a DC attorney sent. That's like the extent of what Hakeem Jeffries is prepared to do about the Capitol being occupied. How do we win against fascism? Strongly worded letter. We word things so strongly that those fascists, they just give up on their ethno-state because... I think the other thing that's funny about this to me is like, it's him saying it's strongly worded. Like, even in this clip, he was like throwing in some allegedly. Allegedly, Trump wants to do something bad. But I found the wording in this letter to be so powerful and moving. It's like, dude, you are the last person to judge what strongly worded even means. You are like the least strongly worded human being on this planet. You've never said strong words in your life. The strongest words you've said are, yes, I'll take that money from Israel from the AIPAC lobby. That's the most affirmative statement he's ever said, is when he says yes to donors about taking their money. But this is your resistance, You know what they say? Beat him at the ballot box. Beat him. Just elect your way out of problems, because these politicians, they're gonna do something to make the world not worse and worse. They're gonna write some strongly worded letters. We should have elected these Democrats a lot sooner. We could have used them back in like 1950. They could have ended the Cold War. All they had to do was write Stalin some strongly worded letters, and the Cold War, it would have ended. It would have been fine. I thought he might be trolling with the strong, because he says it one time and you're like, okay. He says it twice and you're like, come on, man. Don't keep talking about strongly worded letters, please. So yeah, these politicians are useless. They can't do anything. They won't do anything. They aren't here to save you. They aren't here to protect you. It's clearly not a priority. So what are you gonna do? Well, I'm going to talk about another example where a labor union, and not even like the biggest one, but just a union of workers, defeated a government and big corporations in a day. It took one day of the union standing up. And when we look at this story, just compare the level of fight that the union and the union leader has compared to what Bucktooth McGee has here. So just a little background. This is how much money flight attendants make. I think this is Canadian dollars too, so it's not many dollars. They haven't gotten a pay raise in a long ass time. In fact, their pay has always been decreasing. Kind of crazy. There's also issues about them, like when the plane is boarding or delayed or maintenance or whatever, they don't get paid for any of that. So they end up working like a quarter of the hours they end up working are unpaid. It's like you could just pay them that and they would, be making probably a little bit more than they were in 2000, but okay. Like, honestly, it sounds like these airlines are scamming their flight attendants and their workers more than they're scamming their customers, right? I didn't realize. Okay. So anyway, the flight attendants went on strike, and basically they were told that the government would be ordering them to get back to work. Basically, the government was like declaring it some kind of national emergency. And again, this is supposed to be like a liberal government in Canada. This sounds a lot like Trump the more I'm talking about it, but they declared some kind of emergency where they could like force the strike to end, force the union to call off the strike. And this is how the strike leader reacted.
This is the CIRB order. Here's what I'm supposed to do. I'm expected to say, stand down. I'm expected to direct you to go back to work. I'm expected to end this strike. When this strike would end. I said it clearly then, and I will say it clearly now. This strike will end when we get a collective agreement that works for our members.
He said for their families, for their community at the end, but it was drowned out by applause. But pretty cool. This was like the next day.
Mark, the labor relations, the CIRB has declared that this is an unlawful strike. The strike is over, they're saying. You know that people will go to jail potentially, and your union will face hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in fines. What's the limit that you're prepared to exert here to try to make your point?
There's no limit. We're going to stay strong. We're going to stay committed to making sure that those workers can do the job that they love doing and actually be able to afford a roof over their heads, to afford caring for their families. And if it means folks like me going to jail, then so be it. If it means our union being fined, then so be it. We're looking for a solution here. Our members want a solution here, but that solution has to be found at a bargaining table.
Dude is fighting for flight attendant pay in Canada way harder than Hakeem Jeffries here. He's not doing anything. All he said was, I endorse the strongly worded letter of the DC attorney. That's all he's got. This dude is ready to fucking die. He's like, send me to jail. Put the clamps on my nipples. I'm ready for this, Also, to just like the cojones to just say fuck you to the government when the government says call off the strike or you'll be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars and sent to jail. Him just saying, fuck you. No. Literally ripping it up on camera. How is this Canadian flight attendant union leader, like old guy, like 1,000 times harder of a fighter than any Democrat? Why? Why is this man willing to, like, put his life on the line for a modest increase in his union members' wages when, like, Democrats won't literally do anything to fight fascism? It's crazy. And you might think like, wow, like it's serious balls. Could you imagine anyone in America nowadays if they were like trying to strike against a big corporation and then the government came out and said, end the strike or you're going to jail, and the people just being like, fuck you, you know? And you might be wondering, like, how do they even have the cojones to do this? Well, so hilariously, I'll just read this press release. In an almost unthinkable display of conflict of interest, a former Air Canada legal counsel, Maryse Tremblay, will rule on whether to end job action by striking Air Canada flight attendants at the Canadian Industrial Relations Board. So, the Liberal Prime Minister of Canada appointed a former lobbyist for the airline corporation to be in charge of the Canadian Industrial Relations Board and to oversee this ruling. So a former executive lobbyist at Air Canada has been appointed to the government position to decide whether airline employees should be allowed to strike. And they politely requested, can you recuse yourself from this? Can you just get one of the other people to make this decision? Nope. She will hear the case. The CIRB, for people who didn't know, which is everyone, even Canadians I don't think would know this, but it's the Canadian equivalent of the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. So they have to they're supposed to be kind of a neutral arbiter in situations between corporations and workers, but you'd never believe which side they tend to side with. So I mean, there was some obvious corruption they could call out, which could be a political liability for the government. This could turn into a big scandal, right? But here's the real kicker. So the night before the union leader, had made those ballsy statements, tonight the head of Canada's unions met an emergency session to stand united behind the Air Canada flight attendants in defying the government's unconstitutional attack on workers' rights. This is really the reason he had the balls to do this. Because all the major unions in Canada came together the night before he made those statements and said, we're with you. If the government tries to, deny your right to strike, then we're all striking, kind of thing. So suddenly this was going to become a much bigger thing. And sure enough, this happens the day before he makes the statements, and the day after he makes the statements, Air Canada strike ends after tentative deal reached with the Flight Attendants Union. So the corporation went from not being willing to meet them for months on end, right? The unions come together, he makes statements saying, fuck you, and the day later, it's over. The corporation and the government cave in. No demands, nothing. The union just won. And here's an article from the CBC, which is the public broadcaster in Canada. This isn't some radical thing. What they say officially and openly is the concern here from the government and the corporations was provoking a general strike. And basically they're saying that measure, that whole instrument that the government had to try to shut down strikes because the union stood up, it's dead now. They're not going to be able to do it. Because they don't want to risk a greater action. If the government, this article goes over it, but if the government doubles down and says, okay, we're sending you to jail, to this flight attendant union, then every other union is stepping up. The people around the country, not just unions, right? But just normal people are going to be joining in on those protests and saying, hey, fuck you. And then, you can't jail all those people, right? So the government kind of had to back down. It kind of worked itself into a corner there, right? They say, in the future, the CIRB, the government, could go to court to enforce a Section 107 order. Ooh, but that might just result in opposition to the provision rising to the next level, i.e. a general strike. Other unions may say, well, let's put it all together and make it a national strike for all these unions. That's the danger. So what is this to say? Well, corporations and the wealthy might own the government and might control the government. One union, with the support and solidarity of other unions, was able to make them back down in one day. One day the corporations and the government lost. Not to a celebrity, right? Not to a billionaire ready to save the world, not to like some new technology, whatever, just to like normal people working together. That's all it took. And they collapsed in one day. They lost to the people. And just to if you're still questioning at this point, especially like if you're on the liberal or lefty or whatever side and or independent, whatever, and you're still questioning, do the people actually have power? Can it really be that unions and normal people have more power than politicians do? I just wanted to play this little clip. This is a clip of Rashida Tlaib, who is the best congressperson we've had in modern American history. She has by far the most consistent, correct voting record. Well, Ilhan Omar is pretty close, actually, but like Rashida's like perfect basically in terms of her voting record. The most principled person, the best congressperson we could ask for, the best legislator we could ask for, right? Here's her take on being a politician versus, being an activist outside of politics.
I'm in Congress and I find sometimes I feel so incredibly helpless. I'm there, I'm pushing back. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna bring the movement on the inside, and I do my best. But I watch people out there are way more powerful than I am right now. Like, they don't realize, like, I'm inspired. I'm like, keep it up, because it's getting loud. They can't ignore you all. I watch them so upset. Oh my God, I'm getting protested again, Rashida. I said, I ain't related to them. I don't know why you're calling me. They look like your constituents. Maybe you should go meet with them.
Yeah.
Like they're sending me like videos and shit. Like I look at them and I'm like, I'm not in charge of student encampments. I'm not in charge. I don't live in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I live in Michigan. And I just hope people that are listening and young folks, just being engaged, no matter if it's the voting, because voting should be voting plus. I just don't want you to feel like there's no place for you all to be able to use your voice and push back. One of the things I've learned in watching the student encampments, and I've heard the history of the anti-war movement on campuses, has been incredible. I've watched one university flip and now doing some transformative things like getting more scholarships to kids from Gaza to get them here so they can have a future. All of that to say is there's so many ways beyond Congress and beyond legislation and beyond Election Day that we can really transform our country and push back against, the status quo. I just find your place. I know I'm at the DSA convention and there's a place there. It may or may not be your thing of, being among folks that are just like, tax the rich and, pushing back against the 1% and capitalistic schemes. But if it's around education, if it's around civil rights, if around just your being able to have the First Amendment right to speak up and not be targeted or intimidated, and that continues to happen to so many young people, is find your collective folks that will have your back and push back. And so, look at this platform. This is not mainstream media, and you have millions of people that will follow, the conversation and learn and use it to fight back against all of it. I just don't want people to be so pathetic, like they just don't feel like they have any power. I come from Detroit.
Yeah.
I promise you, come every corner is a reminder. Like there's murals, a reminder. Like it wasn't the city hall or the governor or the elected people. It was them. They marched. They boycotted. They blocked shit. They withheld their labor so they can get Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, the right to organize unions. It is literally the home of, the struggle to unionize workplaces. People left, they couldn't leave their work. They died in the workplace. People left and couldn't even survive with the pennies that they were getting from these, the elitists and the boss folks that were running these big companies. And so collectively, they were power. And it's something to learn from that. And I've constantly reminded people of that.
Well, there you have it. The best congressperson we've had in our lifetime says, I don't have the power. You guys have the power collectively. Obviously, as an individual person, you're limited. But when individual people stand in solidarity, it doesn't really take that much to make the government or corporations or whoever back down, because they realize either we try to placate this small group of people, or we risk upsetting a much larger group of people and this turns into a much bigger issue. They know that people have the capacity. If you piss off enough people, something like a general strike is possible, right? Something like mass protests is possible. So it doesn't take a huge group. It's just the threat of having a huge group that in this case was enough to win. So overall, I would say that this union leader, this Canadian flight attendants union leader, is way more powerful than Hakeem Jeffries. And Hakeem Jeffries, like I said, he could, if he decided he was going to be a Bernie Sanders style politician and go around and try to rally people, try to get people out and even Bernie like doesn't do this half the time, but he does it sometimes. He basically, what I'm saying is Hakeem Jeffries could be a lot more powerful. He could be a lot better, right? But I think it's very telling, again, when you have the best congressperson just saying, like, no, I'm inspired by what the people are doing because they can actually do something. And she's been in there for 7 years at this point. So, that's a real person in there saying that. I think we should keep that in mind. And, like she said here, go get organized. Don't forget that you do have a voice and that it does have an impact. And in some cases, it only takes 1 day to make the government and corporations give up. 1 day.